Hello and welcome to the Philly Factor. I'm Paul Perrello. A new cable television series celebrating legendary rhythm and blues recording artists who were on the road to superstardom but for whatever reason never reached their true destinies will debut on TV One. Unsung is the name of the series. It actually starts on November 30th, a series of 1-hour biographical episodes paying tribute and dealing with the highs and lows of the lives and careers of many well-known R&B artists, including a Philadelphia artist. Phyllis Hyman, whose music is still beloved and enjoyed by fans all over the world, born in Philadelphia, lived here for parts of her life. She was part of the Philadelphia international record scene. She was part of that family, but her life was cut short by personal battles with weight and depression. Joining the Philly Factor to talk about the series Unsung, and in particular about artist Phyllis Hyman, is music critic David Nathan and Glenda Gracia, Hyman's longtime manager and part of Phyllis's inner circle. I'd like to welcome you both to our program.
Thank you for having us, Paul.
Yes.
When we think of Phyllis Hyman, Glenda, we really do think of that era, that time when Philadelphia really was a bustling music mecca. We talk about Philadelphia International Records. We talk about artists like Phyllis, Teddy Pendergast, the OJs. I mean, you name it. Patti LaBelle, yeah. You know, some of them are still with us.
That's
some
right.
of them are still recording.
Yep.
This series, Unsung, will feature, among other artists, Phyllis Hyman.
Yes.
You perhaps knew Phyllis best.
Okay.
Maybe not.
Well, I think that, you know, I had the privilege of knowing and working with Phyllis for the last 13 years of her life. And I would say that the nature of the relationship sort of helped me become very, very close with Phyllis. I mean, I had to literally talk to her every single day, several times a day, throughout the course of that time, to help manage her business affairs. And her business affairs often were enmeshed with her personal affairs.
Sure.
Because you can't separate out an artist's personal life from their professional life. It's very hard to do that because one impacts the other. So yeah, we had a great relationship. It was a great professional relationship and a great personal relationship.
How did you meet her? You're obviously working in the music industry.
Yes.
Does somebody refer her to you? A chance meeting at the supermarket? Is she reaching out for someone because her career was making these twists and turns in the road?
It was actually a little bit of all three of those things. The very first time that I met Phyllis, I was introduced to her by Roberta Flack in New York in 1976 at McKell's, a small Upper West Side jazz club where Phyllis was performing. And we met. It was a casual meeting. She was performing there, and after she finished her performance, she came over, of course, to join Roberta and Roberta's then boyfriend, Stuart Bosley, and we sat down and we just connected, you know, that way, very superficially, very socially. Then subsequently, excuse me, when Phyllis was in Sophisticated Ladies and the show was touring, she came to Philadelphia as part of that tour before it hit Broadway. And at the time, she was very friendly with a very dear friend of mine. And we were introduced as a consequence of that mutual friendship. And that introduction actually led to the flowering, the blossoming of our friendship.
Sure.
And when she found herself needing to get guidance for a particular issue that she was dealing with professionally, she called me and said, "Could you help me with this?" And I said, "I would love to." And that was the beginning of our relationship, our professional relationship.
And even 13 years after her passing, you still maintain a relationship with her estate.
That's correct. I run her estate as the executrix for the estate.
Now you mentioned Roberta Flack, and of course when you hear the name Roberta Flack, you think of Donny Hathaway, David, because they made some great music together. Donny Hathaway is one of the other segments of this hour-long feature on Unsung. There are 4 or 5 different segments, one dedicated to Phyllis, one dedicated to Donny Hathaway. you are a music critic. You've been doing this for a long time. You've sort of seen, the artists come and go. You've seen the artists stay for a long time. And then, comes along a wonderful vocalist like Donny Hathaway. And as I said at the outset of the program, even in Phyllis's case, sort of hit a bump in the road and their career sort of spirals out of control to tragic consequence.
Yes. Well, I mean, they are obviously distinct from each other, Donny and Phyllis. And although there are some commonalities in terms of the mental health challenges that they both dealt with, and quite different and singular in regards to how they approached music too. Donny Hathaway was primarily, I always think of him primarily as a musician, even though how most people identify with him is through his vocal performances. He was very much involved in every aspect of music, and one of the great aspects of his work was that he was able to use his training in classical music, which is something he had in common with Roberta Flack, but also was as at home with that as he was with blues, jazz, and R&B. But I think that the point I wanted to make about Donny was that he was very consumed with music. I mean, consumed by it. In other words, he was more at home. I've heard people say he was more at home in a recording studio than anywhere else. Like even on stage. I mean, in other words, being in the studio was really the place where he felt most comforted, most, I guess, insular. I had the opportunity to meet him once in 1973 in London when I was a budding journalist for a music magazine called Blues and Soul. And Donny came on his one and only visit to London. And it was regrettably one of the most uncomfortable interviews I ever did.
Really?
Because, well, he was clearly not at ease with answering questions. And one of the things that when this program was put together, Unsung, they had very, very little footage to use. I mean, almost nothing with him speaking. Because he really wasn't someone who enjoyed that aspect of being a performer. He liked the work, he liked to work in the studio, he liked creating, writing songs, but anything that required him to be in the public eye other than performance was just not something that he appreciated or enjoyed. So he was in some ways a reluctant, I would say he's probably in some ways a reluctant artist.
And yet it's sort of remarkable that both of Phyllis and Donny decide they want to be in this very public arena, in this performing arena, and yet had, of course, their own baggage, if you will, that they took to the table. But and I don't want to paint with a broad brush here, is that oftentimes we hear about artists, even today, who perform wonderfully on the stage, but when it's off the side, in the wings, they're a nervous wreck. They're a bundle of nerves. Right. They don't know how to deal with the press. They enlist personal managers to sort of deal with the press and sort of diffuse some of the tension, if you will. Don't they know this going into it, that this comes with the road to stardom? I mean, didn't feel.
Well, Phyllis would have told anyone and told many people that she knew as a child that she wanted to be famous. She wanted to be rich and famous. That's what she would tell people, that was her destiny, that's what she was going to do. And so she saw to it that ultimately became who she ended up being. So did she sign on for celebrity? She certainly did, and I think that she signed on for celebrity because she was shaped by the experience of her childhood, meaning that when she considered some of the things that may have contributed to what would have been basically an unhappy normal life,
Sure.
if you will,
right.
or a life that she had experienced as being an unhappy normal life. She said, "No, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to do that." And I don't know if it was as a consequence of her being influenced by maybe what she saw on television, or what she read about, or what she fantasized, or she just perceived it to be her destiny. But she was really clear, young, at a very early age. She was very clear that was going to be in large part, maybe her way out of her her childhood financial situation.
Sure.
You know, she saw that as a destiny for herself.
These episodes on TV1's Unsung really take us behind the scenes, if we will, to learn a lot about these two particular artists that we're talking about here, Phyllis Hyman and Donny Hathaway. Does it sort of, how does it affect you to be asked to participate in these programs, knowing that most oftentimes they want to paint a vivid picture or a real picture of who these particular artists were, especially in your case because you had such a personal, close relationship with Phyllis.
Sure.
And in your case, as a TV, as a music critic, you know, part of your job is sort of, I don't want to say picking away at the scab, or you know, sort of being critical of an artist if the music is not what it needs to be. So, when you were approached to do this, how do you sort of balance this, especially in your case, Glenda, given your personal relationship with Phyllis?
One of the things that was critical for me when I was approached about the episode on Phyllis was to really make sure that the production company, that the producer, that the intention of TV1 was to honor Phyllis, was to honor who she was as an artist, was to really examine her body of work and keep the profile, if you will, as balanced and as compassionate and as dignified and respectful as possible. Because what, to me, at the end of the day, notwithstanding Phyllis's challenges, and there were several challenges that she had to deal with, but at the end of the day, after 20-odd years of performing and recording, Phyllis left a legacy that was an incredible body of work.
Sure.
She was a very talented artist. So I wanted to make sure that the centerpiece of the profile would be that, would be honoring that. Because when you consider the word unsung and the fact that what people were looking at in this show was, what was it, given all that talent, what was it that held them back from reaching mega stardom? At the end of the day, Paul, to be honest with you, it is the rare artist. There's a lesser percentage of mega stars than there are of unsung stars, shall we say. So to reach those heights requires, we don't even know what, other than a lot of money perhaps being put behind somebody. But you know, to specifically address the question, what I wanted to do was make sure that the profile was going to be balanced, that it would look at her body of work, celebrate that, and also through dignity look at some of the challenges that she faced. And I was convinced that this show, that this producer, that the intention of TV1, that the writer and the production company, I felt really confident that that package would pull that off.
Yeah, David, same with you?
Well, in addition, the word critic's kind of not completely accurate because I'm more a music journalist, so I never actually did pick anyone's music because if I didn't like it, I just didn't bother with it. But no, what I was going to say is that what I was very fortunate in having was a personal relationship with Phyllis outside of the professional relationship, because we started out as neighbors. When I lived in Manhattan, she lived on 55th Street and I lived on 56th Street. So the very first interview we did for this magazine in Britain, Blues and Soul, literally required me to walk around the corner. And it was at the very, I guess you could say, the burgeoning part of her recording career. So just after she started to get some recognition through the work she was doing with Norman Connors. And just on the verge of the release of her first solo album is when we actually did the interview. And that set in motion an association that lasted pretty much till the end of her life. And so I had a particular perspective on her that wasn't just purely professional. And so when I was asked to participate, it was because of the nature of that relationship. There wasn't just simply someone who had observed her as a music journalist, but someone who got to know her. And I found it a little difficult to do, to be honest with you, because I had a lot of great memories of her, most of which were humorous. and had a lot of humor associated with them. And sometimes I think it's easy to paint a picture of someone, especially if they're dealing with mental challenges and mental health issues, as being maybe depressed all the time or unhappy. But I guess I didn't see too much of that. What I saw was the other side of Phyllis, which was very funny, and we did have some hilarious moments together. And so that was part of, I think, why they asked me to participate. But I found it difficult because in the same way that I find it difficult sometimes to listen to her music, because it brings back memories, and I'm sure this is probably much more true for Glenda than it is for me, but it brings back memories, and when someone's been a part of your life in some way, when they're gone, that you have a sense of loss. So it's sometimes hard. It was a little difficult. Some of the questions, had to check myself and make sure that I didn't just break down and start crying. Just because she was at heart for me a good person, a really good person, and a generous person, and a really funny person, like sense of humor, and I do miss that. Yeah.
Glenda, in your case, as being her manager, I mean, you probably saw, her ups or downs or ins or outs. And we see this a lot with, and we talked about this before, we went on the air, is that a lot of the contemporary artists today, you got to sit there and say, where's so-and-so's mother? Or why doesn't somebody take them by the lapel and, and sort of shake them into reality? Is it that they don't want to hear what the manager is telling them? Do they think that they're above it all because of their fame? And in Phyllis's case, she had not really made it to that next step to superstardom. But were there telltale signs that there were problems here? Was anybody able to get through to her and say, if you don't stop this, or if you don't come out of this, you're on a slippery slope?
Phyllis knew she was on a slippery slope.
She did.
She totally knew she was on a slippery slope. Phyllis was very clear about her issues. And her issues principally, as David has indicated, were her enormous mental health challenges. Phyllis was diagnosed bipolar. When she learned she was bipolar, she had choices that she knew she could make around how to manage her bipolar disorder disease. She elected not to manage them in the traditional ways, and as a consequence of that, she found herself being cross-addicted. So what comes out of knowing that you have certain challenges that can be managed in a certain way that will give you a more productive result, and you elect not to manage those challenges in a way that will be productive, but in fact could be destructive, then you know what you have to do. And she would say to me, I know what I have to do, it's just too much work. And what did that mean? That meant that she had so many layers to the issues that she was confronted by, that it wore her out to even think about how to address all those layers. And the thing with people who are challenged, whether it's the mental illness or it's something else that they're dealing with, is that you have to take one day at a time. That's all you can ever do, is take one day at a time, and give yourself enough of a break that when you do slip up, that you don't beat yourself up. You haven't failed. You've just slipped. And so you get back up and you start all over again. And eventually, that becomes the habit, that becomes the mantra for you. But she knew that she was on that slippery slope, and in many ways created it or contributed to it.
Sure. When Phyllis passes away, everybody, including the two of you, sort of mourn her passing. Her music lives on, however, in all the recordings that have been left behind. But when you now participate in this show, I mean, do you find yourself sort of sitting back and thinking, if only I would have, and you could fill in the blank, if only I would have realized that this is what was going on? Or maybe you did, but sometimes people just don't want to hear or they don't want to accept that hand that you're holding out, to help them. I mean, do you find yourself thinking, what if I would have been more proactive? Maybe, somebody needed to take her and, bring her to, a doctor or whatever. I mean, do you find yourself doing that? Or, was it predestiny that this is what was going to happen, and no matter, even if Mother Teresa would have come into the room, would she have listened to anybody?
Well, I think the part that's important for people to understand is that Phyllis, we did 5 interventions with Phyllis before she
Really?
actually committed suicide. And I'm telling you that, people who are mentally, and with the bipolar disorder disease, the statistics are that 20 to 25% of people that suffer from bipolar disorder will die through suicide.
Sure.
That's like the outcome of that disease. That's, clearly one of the very serious outcomes of that disease. So with 5 interventions, and one of those interventions was to get Phyllis connected to a psychologist so that she could talk through her issues, so that she could look at those issues. She was hospitalized twice, and she attempted suicide twice before she actually did it. So I think that one of the things that Phyllis knew she was going to do at some point would be successful in her suicide. Now, the question becomes, what could have prevented that? Not altogether sure. We wanted to, because when Phyllis came out of the second facility, when she was in the hospital the second time, I said to her, we're not doing any more 30-day facilities.
Sure.
That's a waste of everybody's money and a waste of your time. Sure. It does not work. You need long-term care. You need to be in the hospital. You need to be in a facility for at least 2 years. The first year is the year that you address all of your issues and get support for that. And then the second year will be the year where you begin to get re-socialized into a situation so that you can feel safe going out into the world. But that's what she really needed, and she elected not to do that. She said, I can't do that. So.
If she would have lived,
sure.
13 years later, we flash forward now,
right.
where many celebrities have come forward
sure.
and have talked about their disorders.
Yes,
many
sure.
of them have admitted to being
bipolar. That's right.
Maybe it would have been easier, and of course, it's hindsight is always 20/20.
Sure.
Maybe she would still be making music. I mean, you got to wonder if her last and final, attempt at suicide,
sure.
it results the way that it does. What if she would have been able to get through it and break through and sort of continue to make music? Do you think she would have made it to the next level? I mean, we talk about superstardom. Do you think she was on the cusp? And the same thing with Donny Hathaway. They were there, but if they would have, pushed on through and they would have made it to the next level, do you oftentimes think about what if Phyllis was around today?
I think about it all the time. I think about it all the time. I sincerely feel that if Phyllis could have managed her disease, and if she could have, along with managing her disease, had remained sober. Because when Phyllis was sober, she was an incredible human being. She was incredible. She was with it. She was just a different person. So if she had been able to sustain her sobriety, if she had been able to manage her mental illness, if she had been able to really get to a place where she found peace with herself, where she made and found peace with herself, where she began to really address the issues that frightened her so deeply about who she was and perhaps what she felt was missing from her life, etc. Because there were, in addition to the challenges, the physiological brain disease challenges, there were emotional challenges. And so if she had been able to kind of get through that stuff, I do believe that Phyllis had every promise of being a superstar. She had projects on the table in development before she died that would have taken her right through to that next level. It was the plan. It was the plan to get to that next level. And I do believe, very sincerely, that if Phyllis had survived through the promotion to promote that last CD, that last studio CD that she created, I Refuse to Be Lonely, I think that would have been the biggest record that she ever would have had. And that would have set up the precursor for the next project, which would have, I think, blown her up.
Yeah, and David, you're shaking your head because I guess as a music journalist, you would have to agree.
Yeah, I mean, no question about it. I think that I was able to observe Phyllis's professional career as much as I knew her personally, but I was also able to see the progress she was making, the movements she was making, and I saw how Glenda was working with her, and that there was, even everything that was being done, to keep, that there were all the things that she was dealing with personally, but even through all that with Glenda's guidance, working with Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff at Philadelphia International, there was really a plan, and that there really was something in place that could have continued the momentum that was beginning to build. I mean, I think that it's worth noting that Phyllis had her first #1 R&B hit of her entire career only a few years before she passed away. I mean, she was definitely in a place where there was some building going on, there was some momentum being created. So that's the tragedy of it in many ways. Of course, there is the personal tragedy of someone who elects to commit suicide, but there's also the professional tragedy, the fact that there's no more music. And the same is true of Donny Hathaway. I mean, it's notable that the night that he committed suicide was the night he was recording. He was in the studio with Roberta Flack. They were working on a whole duets project that had the potential to restore him to public accolade, to restore him to a place that he hadn't been in for many years. And it's not by chance that same night's the night he chose to check out. And so we could say absolutely the same thing about him. Yeah.
Well, we want to invite people to check out the series on TV1. It is TV1's Unsung. And I want to thank my guests for being with us here to talk about the great work of not only Donny Hathaway, but Phyllis Hyman. I want to thank you both for being with us here.
Thank you, Paul, for having us.
Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah.
And for the Philly Factor, I want to thank you so much for joining us here on the program. Until the next time, I'm Paul Perrello.